Welcome to the Dialectic at Work, a podcast dedicated to understanding Marxian theory, its philosophy, its politics, and its economics. I'm your host, Shahram Azhar, Associate Professor of Economics at Bucknell University, and I'm joined by Professor Richard Wolff. So you said that Baran and Sweezy, both in their own ways, had an impact on your trajectory, the way you think about the world. Yet you didn't really stick with their interpretation or their work as, some kind of a perfect or divine kind of an intervention. How did you begin to part company with their theoretical ideas or part ways and move in a different trajectory gradually?
Well, I always felt that I was their student, that they had taught me a great deal, that I felt an intellectual debt to what they had taught me. But I also felt at the same time a disagreement with one key point. They felt sincerely that the basic theoretical work of the Marxian tradition had been accomplished, and that what was needed now were studies applying that theoretical framework, showing what it could do in the way of insights and explanation. And I agree that that's a perfectly reasonable idea of what happened, should happen now. And I understood they wanted me and others, not just me, to do that kind of work. But I could not agree about the basic theoretical work. I had two reactions, I remember. One was, and though I'm not sure I told them this, but one was that there are problems in that theoretical framework that indicate that at least it's not done, And then there was the feeling I had in my mind, the theory is always why would it not change? Why should it not change? Why should we be upset if it changes? I mean, it's dead if it doesn't change. I mean, that's like everything else. If it doesn't change, it's dead, Although now I understand that when it's dead, it changes also. In any case, it was that issue. You put that together with the fact that we kept searching. Is there some kind of way of doing Marxism that doesn't get us into what struck us as theoretical dead ends? Now, I don't know why, and maybe we should explore it, why certain things struck us as dead ends, but they did. And all of our reading of Marxism didn't erase that. I'll give you one simple example, what is called economic determinism, the notion that we as Marxists believe or ought to believe that the economic aspect of society shapes everything else, struck us as, why? Why is that? Why? Give us a reason why we should go there. Seems bizarre. Economics shapes music, and music shapes cuisine, and cuisine shapes this, and that all shapes economics, just like economics. Why are we not looking at the complex why are we assuming that one is the key issue? And we felt that this was serious and that our understanding of Marx was that he was a more sophisticated thinker than that. We understood where the quotations come from in Marx that sound like that, of course, but it was very easy for us to show that there are other quotations from Marx which show that that's not their view. So you got at least a problem here, how to reconcile conflicting arguments in Marx. Not to say that invalidates Marx, because conflicting arguments are to be found in every great writer. It's not interesting except what you make of it. Where do you take the contradiction? But to notice that there is one is no great achievement. And then we encountered, because we were looking for it, we encountered Marxists, probably stimulated by similar concerns to our own, who were coming up with formulations of Marxism that were minus those terrible problems, at least in part, and therefore gave us a sense, follow this, and you may get to where you go. And we ultimately got to Louis Althusser in France, because he, at that time, was the boldest to do that, to say, here's a Marxism without those things that have held you back from really running with the ball in Marxism, because you didn't agree with it. You didn't see the logic of it. You weren't part of the Marxian tradition in these areas. So, for example, if Marxism is economic determinism, we don't believe in that. I mean, I don't give economics that priority and primacy, and no one has explained to me why I ought to. And does that mean I have to leave Marxism? Well, it looked like it might. Steve and I talked about that. We weren't afraid of that. No, we weren't. Remember, in the economics profession at that time, there were no rewards for taking Marx seriously and lots of rewards for dismissing him. So had we decided to go in that direction, would have worried nobody in our immediate environment, including at University of Massachusetts. So we looked and we found in Althusser exactly what we were
Steve,
looking for.
my former professor and your lifetime co-author and comrade, used to say famously that Althusser helped us resurrect Marxian theory back on its feet using overdetermination as an idea. So I'm
That's
curious.
again that's wonderful, that line, because it conveys really the heady excitement that we discovered. Here's a way to understand that doesn't need the economic determinism, that doesn't need some sort of rigid sequence of stages of history, doesn't need lots of this extra stuff that has attached itself to Marxism, which we don't want and we don't need, and we don't see the justification, and weakens the tradition because it's an easy target for the critics.
So one of your major works, Knowledge and Class, culminated via a series of conversations that, of course, you and Steve had, you were having with graduate students and all the rest of it. But correct me if I'm wrong, but one major intellectual moment in this journey is your meeting with Althusser. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The first sabbatical that I had at the University of Massachusetts, I decided I would try to contact Althusser, if that were even possible. He was at that time the rector of the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. That is the highest institute of education, probably in all of France, but certainly in the field of philosophy. So the first thing to stress, for people don't understand this, that here we are in the late 1970s, height of the Cold War, when in France, clearly a part of the Western world, an active public member of the Communist Party of France, which Althusser was, is not only also a professor of economics at the most prestigious school, but he's the rector. That's the highest administrative position at the university. No problem that a communist is in this position. He's already had it for some years. He's very, very famous. Why did we want this? Well, we had by that time really gotten into the philosophy of Marxism, and we had discovered his work as being the kind that was free of those elements we felt were unsustainable, and had been criticized. I should be careful to say, as we try to point out in Knowledge in Class, there were already earlier criticisms. Lukács had criticized this kind of thinking. Gramsci, the greats of the Marxian tradition, had also been worried about what we were worried about. But no one had really done the job using philosophy the way Althusser seems to have done. But we were nervous. Were we making more out of Althusser than was justified? How much of it was him? How much of it was us? All of that. So we thought it'd be interesting to go and talk to the man, tell him what we were doing, and see what reaction we got. So I used a family connection. I have a cousin who's at that time a leading psychiatrist in France, and she knew Althusser and he knew her. And I asked her to intervene, tell him briefly that there's this American economics professor wants to see him. Long story short, he agrees. I go to Paris. Remember, I speak French on that issue. I go to Paris. We have an appointment. And I go to the École Normale where he had a house. If you're the rector, you get a house on the premises. It's right in the middle of a very dense, the fifth arrondissement of Paris, in the middle, university area. And I went to see him at his office. And we spent a couple hours the first time. I did it again more than once. And he did not know that his work was known in the English-speaking language. Well, he knew that the New Left Review in England had published it, some of it, but he really didn't know. He didn't speak English, so it was opaque, all of that to him. He was very interested in that. And then I laid out what we were doing. And he basically said, that's exactly what I want. He said, he said an interesting thing. He said, it reaffirms my view that the future of Marxism will come more from places like the United States than from Europe, even though it's been the other way. And I looked at him, I said, why? I was very excited to hear this, but not something I would have said. He said, because you don't have a Communist Party that's hardly anything, and so it can't hold you back. We have one, and it does. And remember, he says this as a leading member of that party that he is criticizing. He was, by the way, always critical of the party, and many of the party leaders didn't like him either. But he was too famous. You could not, it would have been self-destructive of the party to have kicked him out. They had the same relationship with Jean-Paul Sartre. He could say whatever he wanted. They would not. It was so beneficial to have someone like him be a party person. The same was true with Althusser. So he confirmed for us that that's where we were going, was exactly where things had to go and fit with his idea. We're not held. He said, does the Communist Party hold you back? And we left. We said, it has no, it's too weak. It's been destroyed. He knew that, but hearing it from us crystallized it for him.
So one of the concepts that you imported into economics from Althusser, and he obviously got it from Freud, is this notion of overdetermination, which it is a critique of essentialism. Can you walk us through what is essentialism and how does this idea of overdetermination deal with that particular problem?
Sure. This is a problem of the whole concept of explaining something. Basically, a theory is a collection of statements you make that purport or seek to explain something. I have a theory of why you wore that black shirt today. I have a theory of why.
Makes me look thinner.
There we go. I'll come back to that. I have a theory of socialism, so I write a book about it. Whatever human beings do, they seem to like, America is stronger, they need to tell stories from our earliest childhood. If we're agitated and we have a hard time going to sleep, our mother or father or older brother or sister will read a story to us. And yes, partly we're interested in what's going on in the story, But it's a very complicated business. It's the attention, it's the solidarity, it's the closeness of the parent to the child. That is what's going on here. Telling a story is a very human way of relationship, of connection. And so we have developed a tradition of wanting to tell a story as almost second nature to us. And the story we want to tell for a long time is an answer to the question, why? Why did something happen? Whatever the something is, why did it happen? And theories are a collection of statements comprising a story that purports to explain whatever the object is. Okay, second step in this argument. The minute you want to explain something, you are confronted with a really troubling reality that there are endless relevant factors. For example, your black shirt, it makes you look thinner. Okay. It also goes with your gray pants. It also, black has, as it does for anybody in our culture, has all kinds of meanings and associations. You don't have to be deep into psychology to know that what black means to one person is different from what it means to another. It has a meaning. All colors do, because we grow up with lives that associate feelings, moments, dreams with colors. Red has this meaning because then you can tell a story, right? So the more I go on, then here's another one. Yesterday you wore a different shirt, and you didn't want to wear that same shirt, but you only had the two right with you on the trip, so you took the. I could go on and on, and the number of things that could be relevant. Who knows? Maybe you saw a television program yesterday in which a character you admire was wearing black, and a character you hate was wearing another color. Well, that play, you're still thinking the way you were dreaming about that character who attracted you because she had some quality. That too is starting the story of why you chose black. And a phone call you had yesterday, and. So what human beings discover, if they're honest, is that the explanation for anything, your choice of a black shirt, the war in Ukraine, the Gaza horror that we were living through, that the causes for that are huge. If you have even this much psychology, you'll know that the causes that you are conscious of are a window onto a load of causes that you're not conscious of, that you block out of your consciousness because you don't know about it, because you find those thoughts scary, because you have animosity to these things. So explanation becomes very complicated. As my friends in mathematics used to say, too many variables, you can't solve the problem. So human beings developed coping mechanisms. Why? Because they want to tell a story. But they can't tell a story because you can't cover everything. And yet everything is what you have to. How do you know that the black character in the movie you saw yesterday, whose attractiveness led you to choose that, is more or less important than wanting to look thin? Is more or less important than any. How would you even decide which of these causes to talk about first? Which of these causes to think about so you can talk about them? And the answer is the only way you would know which ones to focus on is if you knew all of them and knew which ones were the key ones. But in order to know which ones are the key ones, you have to know all of them. But you can't do it. So the bottom line is, if you're honest, and there's a long tradition of philosophers in the history of philosophy who have been honest, the answer is, if you understand Aristotle, writes a sentence that nobody has ever understood better than him. I know that I don't know.
Humility.
I don't know. I know that I don't know. What he means, let me translate, is I know that I can't collect for you all of the causes that affect whatever it is you want me to explain. Daddy, why does the sun go up in the morning? You know, Mommy, why are we having chicken for dinner? You know, whatever it is, I can't do what you want, which is to account for this, to explain all, because all is an infinity. And we put that little 8 upside down on its side in mathematics to signal we can't do it. We can't do it. Yeah, but there's a large tradition in human history that says it's inadequate to answer, I can't do it. People want explanations. You can't say to your child, oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. The disappointment in the child's face is enough. You're not going to do that twice. Give them a story. Tell them something. Your employer wants you to answer a question. Your job may depend on it. Answer. Give him some. Explain something. So we develop coping mechanisms. And here's the big one. We select 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of the causes. And we tell a story how they shape the outcome we're trying to explain. And that we can do. We can manage 3 or 4. So I can say, you chose that black shirt because you want to look thinner, because yesterday you saw a really attractive person wearing black, and because your mother's favorite color was black. That's it. I've done it. I feel so good. I have given you 3. Now, it's child's play, if you ever do this experiment, for me to show you that there are 50 other things that played a role, or may have, but you don't know that they didn't. And I can make a prima facie case they probably did. You didn't look at them. Why not? Oh, I looked at the most important. You can't know that unless you know all of them. How do you know the ones you looked at were more important shapers of your decision than the ones you didn't? You'd have to know what they are and examine their influence on you to come to this. Why am I saying this to you? Because it renders econometrics absurd. To connect the dependent variable to these 3 or these 6 independent variables, the very language, one of them's dependent, the other one is independent. There is no independent. Every one of those variables is shaped by the word overdetermination. It comes out of Freud's work on the analysis of dreams. He set himself the problem, being a great psychologist that he was. He set himself the problem, ask your client about their dreams. Why? Because dreams are a place in the human mind where things you're concerned about that are taboo, that are not supposed to be spoken, that your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your husband, your wife, they don't want to hear it. This is frightening. This is taboo. It's bad. So, but you have the thought. What do you do with a thought you have, but it's bad? Well, it goes someplace. That's Freud, one of great discoveries of Freud. And one of the places it goes is in the back of your mind where it can be expressed in a dream. So the psychologist, wanting to help you because you can't read a book, because you can't sustain a romantic relationship, or whatever the issue is, he wants to help you, and he's going to figure out things that are important to you that you can't speak because they were taboos when you experienced something, and it went into your dream world. In the dream world, you can do things which you know are safe because you're asleep, your partner is asleep, and nobody else is in the room. You can have a dream and you can let it go, and your brain knows that. So in your dream, you throw a spear at a tree, and a frog grabs the spear and eats it. And you tell the psychologist in the session, I had a dream, a spear, a tree, a frog. And now the psychologist with you says, okay, we're going to try to understand what the dream means. And Freud figures out how to do this. He says, I want you to talk to me about everything that occurs in your brain about this dream. So tell me, spears, it's called association in psychology. What do you associate with a spear, with a tree, with a frog, with eating, and on and on? And you say, well, spear. Yesterday I was on the train, and there was a strange poster on the wall of the train, and there was a spear, and I was, and what was the spear doing? The spear was protecting somebody from a dangerous adversary. Now, what about a frog? And you go, was that all? Was it something else about this spear? Tell me, was it in the air? Was it held? Why wasn't it in the air? Did you think about what? And you talk, and what's going on, Althusser writes, is he's making a note of all the connections of your life, the day before, the year before, that you are associating with that dream. And he says, if I were to say that your dream happened because you saw a spear on the train, it would be wrong, because there's too many other things going on. I have no basis to say such a thing. Not only that, it turns out that the frog had the same color, as he alluded, as the little ribbon on the spear. And the ribbon was flying in the air, and the greenness of the ribbon was he's now beginning to understand why you put the spear together with a frog, because they have a green that is deep. What is the green? And all of these things are explanations, components that caused the dream of a spear eaten by a frog. And he struggles, and he comes up with the word, Freud does, in German, Bestimmung in German, determination. And what is the determination of your dream? We've been wrong, he said. We've always looked at what causes the dream. Before there was psychology, people said, I had a bad dream when it was scary, and the explanation was you ate a bad piece of potato. You know, something doesn't agree with you. That's how primitive people, not the right word, but early people explained dream. They knew they had something going on. You know, they woke up in a sweat, or a terrible sense of danger. There was something you ate, or something that happened to you yesterday. No, says Freud, it's not determined by this or that. It is the intersection of a whole host of experiences that together upset you enough that you had to have a dream experience to begin to try to cope. So he comes up with this notion, which we found electric in its implications, that we should never have asked the question, what is the ultimate cause of the Civil War? Stop. I used to use the metaphor in my classes the students enjoyed. This is like saying, I want you to enroll in a course that teaches you how to catch the elephants in the Berkshire Mountains. And no student signs up, and we all know why. Because however interesting the mechanism is, there's a problem. There are no elephants in the Berkshires, and we're not going to learn how to catch what isn't there. So why are we looking for the ultimate cause? Why do we give a student an A if you mention these three, and an F if you mention those? There's no basis for doing none. What's interesting is why you chose the three you did. That's what's interesting. Your explanation tells us more about you than about the object you claim to be. It tells us you're a communist. It tells us you're a fascist. Whatever. It tells us about your method of selection. But the academic world doesn't get it. The academic world, including a lot of Marxists, are looking for here comes economic determinism, the economy. You want to know why the war in Ukraine? It's because of grain exports and oil and gas. And is that a factor? Absolutely. Would I talk about it? You betcha. Is it the key cause? I don't know what you're talking about. There is no key cause. Russian history, Ukrainian history, the fact that they have a shared interpretation of Christianity, but also a different one, that they have a history of being in or out of Russia, that the Bolsheviks, gave them a kind of independence that they now regret, all of that is the overdetermination of a decision to have a war. And that we are now with a Marxism which can say to itself and to the world, we are the exploration of that overdetermination. And let me tell you two of the key results of this. We don't have to be economic determinists anymore. We can tell you that we focus on the economics. But then we're doing what everybody does, focus on something, because you can't talk about everything. If I say I'm going to explain something and it requires me to look at everything, I'm going to be dead of old age before I'm done. So nobody can do that. We all have to make a compromise. We all have to look at some of the causes of everything. So we are Marxists. We look at the economic causes, but we have to give you an explanation of that because it's only a partial story. We can never say, it's the truth. Other people can do that because they think that the variables they decided to look at are the only ones that are relevant. That is an arrogance that has no foundation, nowhere ever. If you have the slightest awareness of the history of what theory is, which has by the branch of philosophy called epistemology, then you know that that's a hard claim, that all the great philosophers of the world have shown that's a hard claim. You're acting as if it's self-evident. It isn't, Jack. You know what you're revealing by that? You don't know that literature, not even a little bit. You're confident you have the right answer. There is none. I'm a Marxist. I don't make that claim. I don't need to, because I'm going to tell you that I make the intervention I do because I want people to see and change something in this society. You know what it is? The economic structure. So for me, it's important to link that economic structure, capitalism, with this object, poverty, war, whatever the topic is. And I demand the same of you. I understand you're going to focus on three causes, not the ones I do, a different one. I'm not going to argue that you don't tell the truth. I don't know what you're talking about. You tell your truth, I told mine. And no one can rank truths. That's the way it is. I wish we could. We can't. But I have the right to ask you, what's your agenda, Jack? And don't tell me you're a scientist, because that's really not relevant.
So I just want to interact with this idea of overdetermination, and in particular, I want to connect it back to Marx, because Marxists have historically used the word dialectical materialism to refer to their method or the epistemology, so to speak, that they use. And as far as I can tell, Marx and his major contribution was precisely to merge material factors and subjective factors. At least that's the way it was taught. And yet it seems that despite Marx's very clear warnings, the thesis on Feuerbach and all the rest of it about why these both things matter, yet it seems that 20th century Marxism went in a different direction, and which seems a little mechanical as well as deterministic. Were you struggling with so I know that you were struggling with economics, which is very, empiricist and all the rest of it. Were you also struggling with the dominant view, quote unquote, or the official view of Marxism in terms of its essentialism?
Very much. We were very, very much, I'll put it as strongly as I can. If we had not found a way to reconcile Marxism with a non-determinist epistemology, no key to singular truth, no ultimate cause, none of that. If we hadn't found that, we probably would not have stayed within Marxism. It was for us absolutely crucial. We had to have a Marxism that did not offend our awareness. And that's all it was at first, an awareness that these simplistic story, A causes B, that's out. That is childish. You have to, and there, if I may upset some people watching this, that's because of the time and place in which we functioned. We are the period that in another area gets called postmodernism. It's the rejection of the master narrative. It's the rejection of the ultimate telos, the ultimate end product of something. We don't know. We are Aristotelian. I know that I don't know, or rather, that knowledge is the way we put together some causes with the thing we want to explain. There's lots of different ways of doing that, and the world is the place where these differences collide. And I want to be clear, there are some ways of doing it that frighten me and that are my enemy. If you tell me that the war in Ukraine is the result of, I don't know, Catholicism, and that therefore we should close all the Catholic churches, you can make an enemy out of me. If you're a Nazi and you construct the world this way, you're my enemy. Other people who don't agree with me are formulating something I can say, well, that's interesting. That's my friend or my associate or close to me. I understand people who are different come in all sizes, shapes, forms, and degrees of alienation from me and me from them. But to label one of them the truth, that strikes me as nuts and horribly dangerous in terms of what that has enabled people to do in the name of a truth they believe. It's your truth. It's what makes sense to you, and you have every right to affirm it, to pursue it, to articulate it, to present it. But beyond that, I don't. And it allows me as a Marxist then to say, and I've tried to do this in my teachings, I focus on the economics often because that's what other people don't. And I want them to do that because I'm concerned that the problems we face are not going to be solved unless we include among the many things we do the economics that is ignored or denied. You know, Britain right now, just to give you the first example, Britain is now in a desperate situation. It's a recession that's going on in Britain. It's the last dregs of the empire disappearing. It's their crazy conservative government that tried to deflect popular anger at the decline of Britain by the notion of Brexit, breaking away from Europe as if it would solve England's problems, just made them worse. Now they're living that worse. They're about to vote in the Labour Party after the Labour Party has gone 3/4 of the way to being the Conservative Party. This is a disaster. Now, if you say to me, it's a disaster caused by X, Y, and Z, you're going to get from me a disaster caused by the contradictions of a capitalism whose conditions of existence disappeared, largely through its own behavior. And I will tell that story. But I understand that's my story. And why? Because I'm a critique of capitalism, and that infuses me. But it also allows me to expose those who disagree with me and who exclude that, like the Financial Times or any of the other publications in England, because they make sure not to talk about capitalism as a causative factor. And that, for me, is the interesting. That's what I meant earlier when I said explanations reveal more about the explainer than about the object explained.
So I'm curious about this. In your book, you spend a lot of time comparing different epistemologies or theories of knowledge, as they're called. And in particular, you want to talk about overdetermination or dialectical materialism as an alternative epistemology to three other epistemologies that you talk about in your book. One of them is empiricism, which seems to dominate the imaginations of economics, at least the economics that I got, and rationalism. Uh, could you say a bit about what makes these two opposing epistemologies similar and different at the same time? How are they similar in some way? I mean, you pointed out that they're both essentialist in some way. Could you walk us through that analysis?
Yeah, let's start with the empiricist. The empiricist is this anxious person who wants to know which of the alternative explanations being offered, yours, mine, his, hers, is the right one, the true one. And not only are they anxious, but they've come out with a method of finding out. Look at the facts. Look at the empirical reality. Then remember, we all learned this. Test the theory against the facts, and the theory that is most consistent with the facts is therefore declared the truest, at least for the moment, until more facts emerge and we can make the tests again. Okay. The assumption here, which the critiques of empiricism have made for centuries. So if you don't know this and you've never thought about it, that's about your education. Here's the critique. It presumes that our access to empirical reality is perfect, is not affected by theory. So we have a theory over here, and then we look at the facts as if the theory we have is not involved in how we look at the facts. I'm just looking through the microscope. Well, it's become childish to point out to you. A, the microscope is a product of a theory of glass, of light, and there's disputes about all of this. It's not agreed by everybody what you're doing when you're seeing, number one. Number two, if you understand what overdetermination says, your theory shapes how you see. Then I give examples. You and your best friend go to a movie. You sit side by side in the movie theater, and you stare at the screen for an hour and a half watching the movie. And you come out and you have a conversation, and sooner or later, if you talk about the movie, you'll discover your companion saw things you didn't see. You saw things the companion didn't see. That's not a flaw. That's not weird. That's normal, because the act of seeing is shaped by your theory. Marx has a line in one of his books, your senses have become themselves theoreticians. The point being, you can't do that. You have no untheoretically mediated access to the facts. You're making something up. Proof. To assert that the facts exist and you have access to them without the intrusion of a theory is a theory. That's a claim you just made. And we're back then to square one. You have no escape, and the only thing you've done is ignore the issue, not study the literature. Rationalism is an alternative. You make fun of the empiricists. You recognize you don't know what the real world is, because you have a theory which shapes how you look at the world. So what we have to understand is that there is correct theory, and the rationalist says, I have access to the right way to look at the world. It's not the facts that prove anything. It's do you have the right theory? So it comes out of religion, because the claim of religion is, if I'm a Muslim, the Quran gives me the way to look at the world. Or if I have the Bible, or Old Testament, or New Testament, or any other document for those religions that use documents, I have a way to get the logic, the reasoning, the rationality behind what happens. And that will the magic key to understand how the world is. Notion. They both claim to get to the truth of the world. They both live in the world, that there is one, that they're trying to get it, and they know how to do it. The empiricist by grabbing the facts, the rationalist by getting the right theory. The overdeterminist rejects all of that.
So they're both trying to conserve something, basically.
Yes.
Conserve something, hold on to something.
Yes, as absolute. And one of the great mockeries they throw at people like us is relativist, that every truth is relative to the framework within which it is constructed. We plead guilty. Yes, we are relativists. That's what we think Aristotle meant. I know that I don't know. Translate it. I know that what I know is a part of the story. It's not the whole story, it's a part. I have every right to be passionately committed to it. I have every right to be passionately opposed to other stories. I have no right to claim one of them is the truth, as if there were a standard by which you compare truths to figure out which is the right one. But that's a theory that says you can do that, and then we're back. How do you know that theory? The answer is.
So is this why you decided to move away from that deterministic, essential kind of language and into this new framework where you start talking about conditions of existence? Everything is conditioned and exists in a state of contradiction, overdetermined by all kinds of forces. Would that explain why you and Steve decided to move away from that deterministic kind of language? This causes that, and A causes B. And what is this idea of conditions of existence? How do you?
No, you're absolutely right. It comes directly out. Conditions of existence is just another way of saying for something to happen, for something to exist, because that's an event. There have to be all the conditions enabling that to happen. In other words, it has to be overdetermined by all the things around us. And we're much more interested in looking at the ebb and flow of determinations than we are in finding the ultimate. For us, that's an absurd effort. We don't make it. We don't credit it in other people. We're interested in those who can teach us about back and forth among different aspects of a society. And I should stress also that overdetermination is linked, and this is one of Althusser's greatest achievements in his essay For Marx, early essay, to the notion of contradiction. When Hegel, just to pick somebody, insists that everything is contradictory and that the world is made up of contradiction, and everything we think about is wrapped up in contradiction. That, for example, if you ask yourself, what is being, or what is life, or what is existence, the only way to think about it is the boundary that has with its opposite, non-existence. I can't tell you something exists without telling you what it isn't, where it is not in existence. That this thinking in terms of contradiction is hardwired into us. Overdetermination tells us why. Because if everything is overdetermined, if your choice of that black shirt is overdetermined, then I should be able to tell you, which I'm sure I could do if I set myself the task, that these factors pushed you to pick the black shirt out of your little suitcase. But there were other things that made you think about the red shirt. And you might have, if you were self-conscious, been aware of a tension inside yourself, which is you're feeling the contradictions that come. Otherwise, you'd have to imagine that overdetermination were organized in some way that everything would push you in the same direction at the same time, and there's no reason for that. In fact, everything we do is full of contradictions. We go into the store, we move towards the ice cream, we move away. The ice cream is delicious. The ice cream is fattening. The ice cream is delicious. The ice cream is expensive. The 100 variables that go into the final decision, do I buy it or do I not buy